I was grocery shopping with my mother-in-law when she asked, "Are you still taking those vitamins?" I nodded, not thinking much of it. Then she smirked and said, "Good, because you'll need them once the baby comes." I froze in the middle of the aisle, realizing she just spilled a secret. Imagine believing you're desperately trying for a baby for 2 agonizing years, only to discover your husband, the man you trust most, has been switching your prenatal vitamins with abortion medication, all while he collected insurance money on every failed pregnancy. It was a betrayal so deep, it shattered my entire world. It all started with my mother-in-law. She kept giving me these weird looks, asking, "Yes, why?" whenever I talked about getting pregnant. I was so confused because I thought she wanted grandkids. Didn't she always say a woman's purpose was to give her husband children? She'd tell me, "You should really be trying for a baby." And I'd just stare at her thinking, "Lady, we are trying for a damn baby. That's why I'm taking these prenatal vitamins." She'd just roll her eyes like she didn't believe a word I said. I chalked it up to another one of her strange moments. Then things got really bizarre. I walked into the pharmacy, and as the pharmacist handed over my prenatal vitamins, she leaned in and whispered, "These won't work if you're taking other things." Before I could even ask what she meant, she'd already turned to the next customer. What? The next day, my neighbor caught me buying pregnancy tests. She looked at me with pure disgust. "Still putting up your little innocent facade?" she sneered, shaking her head before walking away. Okay, now this was getting out of hand. I figured my mother-in-law was just spreading her usual old lady BS rumors. But a seed of doubt had been planted. I decided I needed answers. I started searching our bedroom, my husband Damon's and mine, looking for something. And there it was. An orange prescription bottle. Just as I held it in my hand, Damon walked in and froze. "Why do you have these?" I asked, genuinely confused, my heart starting to pound. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the bottle. "Those are just..." But I pulled it back, my fingers already flying, Googling the label. My blood ran cold. The dates. These dates. He'd been refilling these every single month for 2 years. "Give them to me." His voice was sharp, desperate. I looked up at him, the bottle still clutched tight. 2 years, I whispered. "That's exactly how long we've been trying." His face went absolutely pale. "It's not what you think," he stammered. But the pieces were clicking into place, a horrifying picture forming in my mind. He always insisted on bringing me vitamins in bed. Said it was romantic, that he wanted to take care of me. I had believed him. "You've been switching out my vitamins," I said, my voice eerily calm, though I felt anything but. "For abortion medication." I yelled it, the words tearing through the silence. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed?" His face completely drained of color. I told him about the senior partner offer at my firm, the one I turned down for a baby. A baby he made sure would never exist. My voice cracked. They told me new mothers couldn't handle those hours. Damon sank onto the bed, his face gray and defeated. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "Like what, Damon?" I spat. "Like me gaining 40 pounds from fertility drugs." I lifted my shirt, reminding him of my swollen belly. A constant reminder of my physical ordeal. "Remember what you said? That you still found me attractive despite everything." I was crying in my car for hours after those comments. My voice was rising now, filled with years of pent-up pain. "Do you know where my college friends are right now? With their babies. Their second babies. I haven't seen them in a year. Too ashamed to admit I'm still not pregnant." I started pacing, the anger fueling my every step. "My own sister won't even let me hold her baby anymore." "Why?" Damon asked weakly. "She says it's too painful to watch." I laughed bitterly. "My own sister pities me that much." "The money," he started. $47,000. I cut him off. "My grandmother left me that money. And our savings. The 401k loan. We'll get it all back and more," he said quickly. "Insurance covered the treatments. I've been collecting the reimbursements. We actually made money." My jaw dropped. "You've been profiting from this?" I screamed. "Submitting claims for fertility treatments while making sure they'd never work? That's insurance fraud. For treatments that never had a chance." I was almost screaming now. "While you were collecting insurance money on babies you killed." Damon reached for me, but I shoved him away. 3 therapy sessions a week. I backed further away. Dr. Mackenzie diagnosed me with depression. Tried to put me on medication, but I refused to make sure my fertility levels weren't affected. All because I couldn't understand why my body kept failing. It wasn't your body, he choked out. I know that now. I threw my hands up. But I didn't then. When I was grieving babies that you made sure never had a chance. Damon was crying now, truly crying, and I felt a grim satisfaction. When's the last time we made love? I asked, my voice flat. Without a thermometer, without a calendar, without checking if I was ovulating? He didn't answer. 2 years, I stated. 2 years since we've been intimate without it being a medical procedure. I finally stopped pacing and truly looked at him. Really looked at him. All while you were feeding me abortion medication. Then, I pulled out the positive pregnancy test from my pocket. I'm 8 weeks. My hand instinctively went to my stomach. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to jinx it. The words hung heavy in the air. You wanted our baby to be another miscarriage. Damon flinched like I'd slapped him. You're a carrier, he burst out. Of Huntington's disease. Your father had it. You have it. I stared at him, numb. What? His words tumbled out desperately. You have a genetic mutation. 50% chance for any child. They'd suffer. Die slowly, painfully before they turned 40. The room spun around me. Okay. I said slowly, trying to regain control. Then we use IVF with genetic testing. We adopt. We make that choice together. My voice broke. But you couldn't do that, could you? Instead, you made me a murderer without my knowledge. You held me while I cried over negative tests that were actually dead babies. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking, and dialed 911. My husband has been poisoning me, forcing abortions without my consent. I'm currently pregnant and have been unknowingly taking abortion medication. Car doors slammed outside. Just then my mother burst through our front door, not even knocking. She must have been waiting outside. You ungrateful girl. We saved those babies from suffering. I wanted to be a mother. I whispered, tears streaming down my face. You all knew that. You watched me destroy myself trying. Damon's father appeared behind my mother. Son, we need to go now. He started pulling Damon toward the back door. The sirens outside grew louder. As I sat there crying, a different memory of my father surfaced. Something that changed everything. My dad never moved weird or forgot things like the Huntington's patients I'd watched in those medical videos 1,000 times. Never. The front door crashed open and 3 officers stormed in. 2 more sped around back, where Damon's dad was still trying to drag him away. One officer, wearing gloves, carefully took the orange bottle from my shaking hand, placing it into an evidence bag. Another blocked the hallway, ensuring no one could leave. They separated us, putting us in different rooms. I could hear Damon's mom yelling about lawyers and rights, while an officer calmly told her to sit down. The female officer who stayed with me kept asking if I was hurt, and all I could do was repeat, I'm pregnant, over and over. She immediately radioed for paramedics. Within minutes, 2 EMTs were kneeling beside me, checking my pulse and blood pressure. The male EMT saw the evidence bag, glanced at the medication label, and exchanged a worried look with his partner. We need to get her to the hospital right away, he said. My legs felt like jelly, so I just nodded, letting them help me onto the stretcher, even though I could walk. They loaded me into the ambulance, and the officer said she'd follow us to continue taking my statement. The ambulance ride felt like an eternity, yet it also flew by. Suddenly, I was in an emergency room, surrounded by blinding lights and bustling nurses. They put me in a bed, started in 4, and drew what felt like 20 tubes of blood. The nurse asked about the last time I'd taken any medication. I told her about the vitamin Damon had given me that morning, and she wrote even faster on her clipboard. An ultrasound tech wheeled in a machine, squirted cold gel on my stomach. Everyone went quiet during the scan. Her face remained neutral, but I saw her pause, focusing intensely on certain angles and tiny measurements. The ER doctor came in, ordering more tests. A quantitative HCG, a complete metabolic panel. Hours blurred into one. Nurses checked on me every few minutes, taking more vitals. Around 3 a.m., a woman in a sharp gray suit walked in. Detective Deborah Hewitt, Special Victims Unit, she introduced herself. She pulled a chair close to my bed, her voice quiet and steady. She said she needed to take my statement whenever I felt ready. I started from the beginning. The pharmacy visit, my neighbor's comments, then everything that had exploded tonight. She wrote meticulously in a small notebook, only interrupting to clarify dates and times, details she seemed to think were crucial. When I got to the insurance money, she asked if I had any statements or paperwork. That's when I remembered our filing cabinet at home. She asked for permission to send officers to collect evidence from the house, including my pill organizer and anything from our bedroom. I signed 3 different consent forms, giving them permission to search and seize whatever they needed. While we waited for more test results, my mind kept circling back to my dad. Damon had claimed he had Huntington's, but my dad's symptoms, they'd started with mood changes and confusion, not the jerky involuntary movements that typically came first. The more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. He never had those dance-like movements the disease was named for. Detective Hewitt noticed my hands shaking harder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked gently. I told her about my dad, and she wrote down the name of the hospital where he'd died, promising to look into it. The sun was just starting to peek through the blinds when she finally left, promising to stay in touch and handing me her direct number. The moment the hospital discharged me, with strict instructions to follow up with my OB immediately, I called Dr. Munoz's office. It was only 7:30 a.m., but the panic in my voice must have been clear. I explained the medication exposure, and the receptionist promised to squeeze me in that afternoon. I asked if I could go home to shower to just change, but the officer waiting outside said detectives were still processing the scene. She offered to escort me to grab some clothes and toiletries, warning me it might be hard to see. The house looked normal from the outside, but inside, black powder-coated doorknobs and surfaces where they'd taken fingerprints. My bedroom door was crisscrossed with yellow evidence tape. I could see gaps on my nightstand where they'd taken things. The officer helped me pack a bag from the hall closet and bathroom, while I tried desperately not to look at the bed where my entire life had fallen apart. Part of me wondered what Damon was thinking, watching his carefully constructed lies crumble. All his half-finished explanations. It made me realize how long he must have carried this secret. Next, she drove me to the courthouse, where a woman from Victim Services was already waiting. "Queenie," she introduced herself, leading me to a small office filled with tissues and water bottles. She patiently explained the protective order process, helping me fill out form after form, detailing dates, incidents, and my deepest fears. My hand cramped from writing, but she insisted details mattered. The judge would review it within 24 hours, deciding on a temporary order before the full hearing. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but who would believe me? Who would understand? Finally, I sent my sister a text, just the facts. Found medication, hospital, needed a place to stay. She read it immediately, but 10 minutes, which felt like an eternity, passed before she responded. It was just an address for a hotel she'd booked and paid for with a simple note, "We'll talk when you're ready." Just 3 hours later, Detective Hewitt called. She wanted to meet at the station. She'd already tracked down the people who made those weird comments to me. My hands were still shaking too much to drive, so I grabbed my bag and took an Uber. The police station smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. Detective Hewitt met me in the lobby, a folder already thick with papers clutched in her hand. She led me to a small room with a recorder on the table. She explained that she'd found both the pharmacist and my neighbor within 2 hours. The pharmacist had been incredibly nervous at first, but when Detective Hewitt explained the full situation, she broke down crying. She'd wanted to report something for months, but had no proof. She'd noticed the suspicious prescription pattern and recognized the medication as something absolutely not to be taken with prenatal vitamins. When she tried to look up the prescribing doctor, the system showed someone from 3 states away who'd never treated me. My neighbor's statement was even worse. She admitted my mother-in-law had been coming to her house for coffee every single week for the past year, spinning stories about how I was refusing to give them grandchildren on purpose, how I was secretly taking birth control behind Damon's back. The neighbor said she believed it all. Why would a sweet old lady lie about something like that? Detective Hewitt showed me the written statements. I had to read them 3 times before the words truly sank in. Seeing it all officially written down, it made everything real in a way that just churned my stomach. After leaving the station, I went straight to Dr. Munoz's office. My appointment wasn't for another hour, but I couldn't sit still in that hotel room, my mind racing with what might be wrong with my baby. The receptionist took one look at my face and immediately brought me back to an exam room. My fingers trembled as I changed into a gown. Dr. Munoz came in carrying my file and a box of tissues. She didn't say a word at first, just squeezed my shoulder before setting up the ultrasound machine. She squirted the cold gel on my belly and moved the wand around slowly. I held my breath, staring at the screen for any sign of movement. Then there it was. A tiny flicker. On the screen, Dr. Munoz turned up the volume and I heard it. The fast whoosh 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 of a heartbeat. Strong. Perfect. We both started crying at the same time. She had to wipe her own eyes before she could take measurements and examine everything. She printed out 6 pictures for me, explaining that while the medication exposure was incredibly concerning, the baby was measuring right on track for 8 weeks, with good cardiac activity and normal development so far. She scheduled me for weekly appointments to monitor everything closely, and gave me her personal cell number, just in case anything at all felt wrong between visits. The medical assistant brought in a stack of consent forms to release all my medical records to the police for comprehensive toxicology testing to document exactly what was in my system. I signed every single paper without reading them. I wanted every possible test, every record that could protect my baby and build this case. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived at the hotel from our insurance company. Statements going back 2 years. Reimbursements for fertility treatments I had never seen. The checks had all been deposited into an account that wasn't ours. The amounts added up to almost $30,000. Damon had been collecting all of this while systematically poisoning me. I called Detective Hewitt immediately. She came to pick up the statement, telling me this added mail fraud and insurance fraud to the growing list of charges. Each fake claim he'd submitted was a separate federal crime, she explained. With this many claims, he was looking at serious prison time for the fraud alone. That same afternoon, I walked into a bank down the street. I opened my own account just in my name. The teller was a young woman who didn't ask a single question when I transferred half of our joint savings. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely sign my name. She just printed the receipt and quietly slipped me a card for their domestic violence resource line, along with my new debit card. Back in my hotel room, I spent the next 6 hours poring over everything I could remember from the past 2 years. Every conversation about babies, every time Damon brought me vitamins in bed, every negative pregnancy test, every doctor's appointment, every single symptom I blamed on stress or fertility drugs. A chilling timeline emerged. He'd been refilling the abortion medication the day before each of his romantic vitamin deliveries, then conveniently scheduling business trips right after to avoid dealing with the aftermath. Detective Hewitt called the next morning. My neighbor had given an even longer statement, with more details about my mother-in-law's visits. Apparently, she'd been telling the entire neighborhood that I was a selfish career woman who cared more about making partner than giving her son children, and that I was secretly on birth control while pretending to try for a baby. The deliberate isolation campaign finally made sense. That's why none of our neighbors would talk to me anymore, why I'd stopped getting invited to block parties. Detective Hewitt had also secured the pharmacy records through a warrant. They showed the abortion medication being filled like clockwork every month for 2 years. Always exactly 1 day before Damon would bring me my special vitamin surprise in bed. The sheer precision of his planning made me run to the bathroom to throw up. He had calculated exactly how to hurt me while making it look like love. That afternoon, Dr. Munoz called again. She'd written a detailed medical letter for the case, explaining the exact risks the medication posed to a developing fetus: potential birth defects, developmental delays, increased miscarriage risk. The cold, technical medical terms somehow made it more real, more terrifying than her in-person explanation. Seeing it in black and white from a medical professional made it impossible to pretend this wasn't as bad as I thought. While organizing my phone to back up evidence, I found a voicemail from my mother-in-law. It was from 2 days before everything exploded. Her voice was syrupy sweet, saying we needed to talk about what was best for everyone, and that sometimes difficult decisions had to be made for the greater good. Perfect. I immediately forwarded it to Detective Hewitt. She said it was perfect evidence of conspiracy, clear proof of prior knowledge of their plan. 2 days later, I was in a small conference room at the district attorney's office. ADA Maggie Coulter spread out folders across the table. She listed the charges they were considering: assault, poisoning, reproductive coercion, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. The list just kept growing as she flipped through the pages of evidence Detective Hewitt had gathered. She was honest. Reproductive coercion cases were rare, she said. Juries sometimes struggled to understand them. But the physical evidence was strong, especially with the pharmacy records and that damning insurance fraud paper trail. I signed more forms, authorizing access to all my medical records. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. The next morning, Queenie Haynes from Victim Services met me at my apartment. Clipboard in hand, a kind smile on her face. She walked through every room, checking windows and doors, making notes about security upgrades. That afternoon, new deadbolts were installed. She helped me set up a doorbell camera that sent alerts straight to my phone. She gave me a safety plan worksheet to fill out: emergency contacts, safe places. Having someone whose only job was keeping me safe felt like being wrapped in a warm blanket after being cold for so long. She programmed the domestic violence hotline into my phone and showed me how to send a quick emergency text to 911. That same afternoon, I called the hospital where my father died 7 years ago. I asked for his complete medical records. The clerk said it would take 2 weeks, but I paid the rush fee. I needed them sooner. Damon's claim about Huntington's, it just didn't sit right with me. I remembered my dad's symptoms differently. His decline had been faster. His confusion didn't match what I'd read online about Huntington's patients. I needed to see what his actual doctors had written, not what Damon had fed me. The next day, HR called me in. A brief meeting about medical leave options. My boss had already approved emergency leave, and they explained how short-term disability would work if I needed more time. They didn't ask for details. I appreciated that. I wasn't ready to explain everything to coworkers. My boss sent a simple email. Take whatever time I needed, projects were covered. Professional support without prying questions. It helped me keep some dignity while everything else fell apart. Later that week, Detective Hewitt asked me to review the insurance paperwork they'd collected from our files. As we went through the reimbursement statements, I noticed checks being sent to a P.O. box I'd never seen before. The address was in the next town over. Damon had apparently been collecting these checks for 2 years. Each one was for thousands of dollars from fertility treatments he knew would never work. The detective photocopied everything. This would significantly strengthen the fraud charges, she said. The financial betrayal somehow hurt differently than the physical violation. It showed such meticulous, cold-blooded planning. That Friday, Dr. Munoz called me in to discuss genetic testing options. Damon's Huntington's claim had raised too many questions. She explained I could test just myself first to see if I carried the gene, and then test the baby only if needed. The choice felt huge, but at least this time it was mine to make. A simple blood draw results in 2 weeks. I decided to do it. I needed to know the truth after so many lies. She drew 3 vials of blood, and I watched her label each one carefully. The following Monday, Detective Hewitt called. They were executing a search warrant on our home office that afternoon. I gave her the garage code. She said I didn't need to be there, which was a massive relief. She called back 3 hours later. They'd found a treasure trove. Correspondence between Damon and various insurance companies, hidden in a locked filing cabinet. Claim forms, appeal letters, detailed records of every fraudulent reimbursement. The scope of the fraud was far bigger than we'd imagined, totaling over $90,000. Each document they found added another piece to the crushing case they were building. Tuesday morning, I went back to Dr. McKenzie for therapy, but this time we focused on trauma coping, not the depression she'd been treating me for. She helped me see how that false depression diagnosis had shaped everything, how I'd blamed myself for not being happy, for my body failing. We practiced grounding techniques for when the panic hit, how to recognize trauma responses versus actual threats. My hypervigilance was normal, she said. We'd work on feeling safe again slowly. 2 weeks after my hospital visit, the preliminary toxicology results came back. Confirmation. Exposure to abortion medication. The lab found traces in my system, consistent with regular, ongoing ingestion. The timeline matched perfectly with Damon's romantic vitamin deliveries. Seeing it confirmed by science, documented in medical language on official letterhead, made it simultaneously more real and more horrifying. I threw up after reading the report, even though I already knew what it would say. 3 days later, the bail notification arrived in my email at 6 a.m. He was out. $50,000 bond. Conditions: no contact, staying 500 feet away from me, GPS ankle monitoring. I called Queenie, panicking. She came over immediately, helped me update all my safety protocols. She reminded me the GPS meant they'd know instantly if he came near me. We practiced what I'd do if I saw him in public. She stayed with me until I stopped shaking. The no-contact order was supposed to make me feel safe, but knowing he was out there somewhere, it made my skin crawl. That same afternoon, the locksmith came. I followed him room to room with my credit card as he replaced every single lock. He installed deadbolts on doors that never had them, handed me 6 copies of the new keys. One for my car, one for work, one for Queenie, and the others hidden in places Damon would never think to look. The security company arrived next, mounting cameras at every entrance. The technician showed me how to check the feeds on my phone, while he drilled holes for the wiring. I documented everything. Every receipt, every installation photo, every new security measure, in a folder labeled Protection Order Evidence that I shared with Detective Hewitt. My phone buzzed while the technician was testing the motion sensors. It was Kingsley Fraser from work. Need anything? I can handle the James presentation next week, he texted. No questions asked about why I'd been out. I typed back yes, immediately, relief flooding through me. Someone at work was being normal about this whole mess. He sent back a thumbs up emoji. The meeting invite disappeared from my calendar, replaced with his name as presenter. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started building a spreadsheet. Every symptom I'd had over the past 2 years. Every doctor's appointment. Every negative pregnancy test. The dates lined up perfectly with Damon's prescription refills. A pattern so clear I couldn't believe I'd missed it before. I color-coded the entries. Green for normal vitamin days, red for the days he'd brought me special vitamins in bed, yellow for the days I'd felt sick or had bleeding. The visual made me want to throw my laptop across the room. Instead, I shared the file with Detective Hewitt and Maggie Coulter, adding detailed notes about which symptoms happened when. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived from the hospital where my dad died. His medical records going back 15 years. I spread the papers across my dining table, scanning through test results and doctor's notes until I found it. There it was, in black and white. A neurologist assessment from 6 months before he died stating, symptoms consistent with frontotemporal dementia. No indication of Huntington's disease. Genetic testing not warranted. My hands shook as I photographed every single page, texting them immediately to Detective Hewitt. The entire foundation of Damon's lie. The reason he claimed he was protecting future children from suffering. It was completely made up. My dad never had Huntington's at all. The genetic counselor Lauren Ahmed called me the next morning, referred by Dr. Munoz. We can test for the Huntington's mutation without anyone else knowing the results, he explained calmly. You'd be the only one with access unless you specifically authorize release. He walked me through the process. Blood draw genetic panel results in about 2 weeks. He even said, even if you test positive, which is unlikely given your father's actual diagnosis, there are options for having healthy children. I made the appointment for that very afternoon. I couldn't wait any longer to know the truth. The lab was empty when I arrived. Just me and the technician who drew 3 vials of blood while I stared at the wall. She put a bright yellow sticker on the samples. Confidential genetic testing. Special handling, restricted access. I signed the form. Only I could receive the results. No exceptions. Not even for medical emergencies. Walking out of that lab felt like taking back control of my own body for the first time in years. 2 days later, Detective Hewitt emailed me the bail hearing transcript. I read it 3 times, my anger growing harder with each pass. Damon's lawyer actually stood in front of a judge and argued this was about benevolent intent to prevent suffering. He painted my husband as some kind of hero, saving hypothetical children from a genetic disease that didn't even exist. The lawyer claimed Damon was trying to protect me from the burden of watching our children die young, that his actions came from love, not malice. The transcript showed the judge wasn't buying it, calling the behavior an unconscionable violation of bodily autonomy. But the defense's attempt to spin forced abortion as mercy? It made me want to scream. I printed the whole thing, highlighted every lie, every manipulation of facts, and sent my own annotated version back to Detective Hewitt. That afternoon, I called the state pharmacy board. I filed a formal complaint about the pharmacy that had been filling these prescriptions for 2 years. The woman on the phone took down every detail. Prescription numbers, dates, the fact that the medication was given to someone who didn't even know they were taking it. An investigator would review the case, she said, to determine if the pharmacy should have caught the suspicious pattern. I gave her Detective Hewitt's contact information, and she promised to coordinate with the criminal investigation. While I was finishing the pharmacy complaint, my sister texted me. She asked if I wanted to meet for coffee the next day. I stared at her message for 5 minutes before typing yes, choosing a place halfway between our apartments. We sat outside despite the cool weather, both holding our cups like shields. I need help understanding the insurance stuff, she said, no small talk. Mom won't tell me anything. I pulled out the folder of statements I'd been organizing and walked her through the fraud. The claims, the reimbursements, the money that went to a P.O. box I never even knew existed. She took notes on her phone, asking practical questions about coverage and legal implications, never once mentioning babies or pregnancy or any of the painful stuff between us. When we finished talking paperwork, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand once, quickly, before pulling back. Same time next week? She asked. I nodded, feeling something small and fragile, something hopeful starting to rebuild. The next morning was my 8-week follow-up with Dr. Munoz. I sat in the waiting room surrounded by other pregnant women, trying not to compare myself. The ultrasound showed that tiny flickering heartbeat, even stronger than last time. Measurements matched my dates perfectly. Everything looks good, Dr. Munoz said carefully, printing out pictures for me. The baby is growing exactly as expected, despite everything you've been through. She scheduled my anatomy scan for 12 weeks out, writing the appointment on a card I tucked into my wallet like a sacred promise. 3 days later, Detective Hewitt called me to her office. She spread printed text messages across her desk. Screenshots from Damon's phone. My stomach turned. Messages between him and his mother, going back months. Talking about managing my expectations, keeping the situation under control, like I was some kind of problem to solve. One message from his mother said she'd talked to the pharmacist about being discreet. Another mentioned how she'd been telling neighbors I was being difficult about having kids. Detective Hewitt pointed to dates on those messages that matched up with my worst days. The days I'd cried in fertility clinic parking lots. While they were planning their next move, she slid the papers into a folder. These will help build the conspiracy charges, she said. The planning makes everything worse legally. The next afternoon, I met with Maggie Coulter at the courthouse. She walked me through a whiteboard covered with different charge levels and sentences. First-degree assault carried more time than reproductive coercion, she explained, but proving intent was harder. The insurance fraud charges were federal, meaning different courts. She drew circles showing how plea deals worked, how they might offer to drop some charges if he admitted to others. She warned me that most cases ended in plea agreements, not trials. Her honesty helped me understand what was realistic, instead of what I desperately wanted, him in jail forever. That evening, I pulled out every document from my grandmother's estate. Bank statements, withdrawal records spread across my kitchen table. I added up every penny we'd spent on fertility treatments, the loans we took out, the savings we emptied. I wrote each number in a notebook until the total made me dizzy. $47,000 from my inheritance, $12,000 from our joint savings, $8,000 from the 401k loan, plus interest we were still paying. I photographed every page and emailed them to Detective Hewitt, then made copies for the insurance investigator who was building her own separate case. For days later, my doorbell rang. A certified letter from the genetic testing lab. My hand shook as I opened it. The results were clear in black and white. No Huntington's mutation detected. No carrier status. Nothing that would have passed to any children. I read it 3 times before the rage hit me. All his tears, all his talk about protecting future babies from suffering. It was a complete fabrication. There was never any risk at all. I called Detective Hewitt immediately. She came to pick up the results herself. This, she said, destroys their entire defense strategy. She took my official consent to use the results in court. This proved the entire foundation of their actions was a lie. The insurance fraud investigator showed up the next morning. She had a recorder and dozens of questions about the fertility clinic visits. She meticulously went through each claim Damon had submitted, showing me his signatures on forms, claiming treatments he knew would never work because of what he was doing to me. Halfway through, she noticed my hands shaking. Without asking, she got up, went to my kitchen, and brought me a glass of water. She waited patiently while I steadied myself before continuing. She explained that insurance fraud over $25,000 became a federal crime, meaning the FBI might get involved. Was I prepared for that level of investigation? My mother called that night. I almost didn't answer, but I decided to face it head on. She started rambling about how Damon's parents had convinced her it was for the best, how they showed her articles about Huntington's, how they made her believe she was protecting future grandchildren. I cut her off. You chose to believe strangers over your own daughter, I told her. You watched me suffer for years and did nothing. When she tried to argue, I simply said I needed space to heal. And then I hung up. For the first time in my life, I blocked her number. The power of that simple action, pressing that block button, felt like taking back a piece of myself. 2 days later, Dr. Mackenzie worked with me on testimony preparation. She taught me grounding techniques for when memories got overwhelming. We practiced telling my story, pressing my feet into the floor, focusing on physical sensations instead of getting lost in the emotions. We went through the worst parts over and over until I could say them without crying. Not because I didn't feel it, but because I could control how I showed it. She taught me to pause and breathe when lawyers tried to confuse me, to ask for questions to be repeated if I needed time to think. These skills felt like armor I was building, protection for whatever legal battles were coming. That Saturday, I forced myself to try a prenatal yoga class at the community center. I picked a spot by the door just in case I needed to run. The other pregnant women chatted about nurseries and names, while I focused on not panicking, just breathing and moving my body that still didn't quite feel like mine. But I made it through the whole hour. Even the meditation at the end, where the instructor talked about connecting with our babies. Walking to my car afterward felt like climbing a mountain, but I'd done it. I'd been in a room with other pregnant women, and I had survived. Monday morning, Maggie called with news about a plea offer from Damon's lawyer. She asked me to come review it that afternoon. It wasn't what I wanted, she explained, but it was something. 18 months for assault, 3 years for insurance fraud. Sentences to run concurrently, meaning he'd serve 3 years total. The reproductive coercion charges would be dropped, too hard to prove, and the conspiracy charges reduced. This was actually better than many cases got, she said. Juries sometimes didn't understand reproductive coercion. Having him admit guilt and serve time was still justice, even if it wasn't enough justice. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad. I started writing my victim impact statement. I focused on the choices he stole from me, rather than how sad I felt. My hands shook as I wrote about consent and autonomy, about medical decisions made without my knowledge, about the fundamental right to know what was happening to my own body. I kept crossing things out and starting over, trying to find words that would make the court understand without sounding like I was asking for pity. The draft took 3 hours. When I finished, I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Not ready to send it yet, but I needed to have my truth written down somewhere. Weeks passed. My belly grew rounder, the baby moving more each day. Tiny kicks, constant reminders that this one was real and alive despite everything. At my 20-week anatomy scan, the technician measured every part of the baby. I held my breath, waiting for bad news that never came. Dr. Munoz came in after reviewing the images and actually smiled. A real smile, not the careful professional one. She showed me how everything was measuring perfectly normal. We both let out a long breath at the same time, neither of us realizing we'd been holding that tension for so long. The restraining order hearing came 2 weeks later. I wore my most professional outfit, the one from before pregnancy that barely fit anymore. I sat in the witness chair, answering every question clearly, while Damon's lawyer tried to make it sound like I was just overreacting to a marital disagreement. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, saw right through it. She extended the protective order for 2 full years, adding specific provisions about third-party contact through family members. Maggie called me the next afternoon. The insurance investigator's report had come in. She was filing additional fraud charges based on the new evidence. The case was getting stronger with each document they found, each forged signature, each false claim he'd submitted. While I thought we were trying for a baby, Kingsley, my colleague, came over that weekend with his laptop. He helped me build a detailed spreadsheet, showing every penny we'd spent on fertility treatments, every lost opportunity, every financial decision I'd made, thinking we were building a family. Using my professional skills for this, organizing data and calculating damages, made me feel confident for the first time in months. I spent Sunday afternoon going through our photo albums. I packed away every picture with his parents, but kept the ultrasound images on my refrigerator where I could see them every morning. Choosing what to keep and what to store felt like drawing boundaries around my life, deciding what belonged in my future, and what needed to stay in the past. The insurance investigator called Monday. They were starting their own civil case against Damon, separate from the criminal charges. Having multiple systems working at the same time, criminal courts, civil courts, insurance fraud investigations, it brought this weird comfort, knowing he couldn't escape all of them. Dr. Mackenzie and I spent our next session working through the guilt I carried. About not seeing the signs earlier. About trusting him when there were probably hints I missed. She helped me understand that self-blame was just another way he was still controlling my thoughts. That trusting your spouse wasn't stupid. It was normal. That Thursday, Detective Hewitt called with an update that actually made me laugh for the first time in weeks. Both Damon's parents had given statements, but their stories didn't match at all. His mom said it was all Damon's idea, while his dad claimed it was a family decision made years ago. Their lives were falling apart, and watching their story crumble brought this grim satisfaction I didn't know I could feel. I spent the next 3 days revising my victim impact statement. I stripped out the emotional parts, focusing purely on autonomy and consent, on the medical violations and the choices stolen from me. The final version was 2 pages of clear facts about what he took from me. Not asking for any specific punishment, but making sure my truth would be part of the official record forever. The next morning, I caught myself refreshing the court website for the 10th time before noon. Finally, I closed my laptop. I called Queenie and asked her to handle all legal updates from now on, unless something major happened. She agreed right away. I felt my shoulders drop with relief. 2 days later, at my regular OB appointment, the nurse frowned at my blood test results. Dr. Munoz explained I had mild anemia. She handed me an iron supplement prescription and said it was totally normal for pregnancy. After weeks of worrying about abortion drugs and genetic tests, having a regular pregnancy problem actually made me smile. The pharmacy had my iron pills ready in 20 minutes. I took the first one right there with a bottle of water. That Thursday afternoon, Maggie called while I was folding laundry. The grand jury, she explained, would probably vote to indict on several felony counts, but the actual trial wouldn't start for at least 6 months. I thanked her and hung up, feeling oddly calm about the slow timeline. Friday evening, Queenie texted me about a support group for women who'd been pregnant after loss. I decided to try it. The meeting was in a church basement on Tuesday night. I sat near the door just in case. When my turn came, I managed 3 sentences about my situation before my voice cracked. The woman next to me squeezed my hand. Nobody pushed me to say more. I went home feeling lighter somehow. That Saturday morning, I woke up early and made pancakes just for myself. While I mixed the batter, I talked to my belly about silly things. The weather, what toppings to use. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and butter. For 30 minutes, nothing else mattered. I ate slowly at the kitchen table, one hand on my growing bump, telling the baby about my grandmother who taught me this recipe. It became my new Saturday routine for the next 3 weeks. Each weekend, a different flavor and random memories shared with my belly. Detective Hewitt called on a Wednesday afternoon to confirm the grand jury date was officially set. My written statement was enough, she said. I wouldn't need to testify in person. I actually laughed with relief, thanking her 3 times before hanging up. That night, I slept 8 hours straight for the first time in months. The next morning, I printed out my impact statement and read it one more time. Every word felt true and steady, without asking for revenge or specific punishment. I signed it, put it in an envelope, and mailed it to Maggie's office that afternoon. Walking back from the post office, I felt grounded in a way I hadn't in forever. 2 weeks passed. Iron pills. Saturday pancakes. Avoiding legal websites. My 24-week appointment finally arrived on a sunny Thursday morning. Dr. Munoz squeezed gel on my belly and moved the Doppler around until that beautiful whoosh whoosh filled the room. She counted the beats and smiled. Everything looked perfect, she said. The baby is growing right on schedule. She printed out the heartbeat strip and handed it to me like a prize. I walked out of the medical building into bright spring sunshine and stopped on the sidewalk. Both my hands went to my round belly. I stood there, feeling the baby move inside me. Cars passed. People walked around me. But I didn't care. For the first time since finding those pills in our bedroom, since learning about the conspiracy, since discovering the lies about my dad, I felt actual hope bloom in my chest. This baby was real, strong, and utterly mine. The nightmare wasn't over, but I was going to be okay. We were going to be okay.